In October of 1888, a small parcel arrived for a man named George Lusk. Inside was half of a human kidney and a letter. It was signed in shaky, misspelled handwriting with 2 words, "From Hell." Of all the letters the police received during the Whitechapel murders, and there were hundreds, this is one of the very few that experts still take seriously as possibly real, possibly written by the killer himself. And here is the strange thing. That letter, the one that might be genuine, does not sign itself Jack the Ripper. The letter that gave the world that name was a different one, and that letter may have been a hoax, written, some believe, not by a killer at all, but by a journalist to sell newspapers. Sit with that for a moment. The most famous name in the history of murder, Jack the Ripper, may never have come from the murderer. It may have been invented by the press. This is the story of the Whitechapel killer, told through the letters he supposedly wrote. Because the deeper you go into them, the harder a question becomes. Did the killer ever speak to us at all, or did we invent his voice?
In the autumn of 1888, the East End of London was gripped by fear. In the poverty-stricken streets of Whitechapel, a killer attacked and murdered at least 5 women over the course of a few terrible months. Their names were Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. They were poor. They worked the streets to survive in one of the most desperate districts of the city. They were, as much as anything, victims of a world that had already failed them long before that autumn. The killer was never caught, never identified. The murders stopped as abruptly as they began, and no one was ever brought to justice. But the case did not fade. It became instead one of the most famous unsolved mysteries on Earth. And not only because of the murders, it was because of what arrived in the mail. Hundreds of letters claiming to be from the killer, and one of them gave him the name the whole world would remember.
In late September 1888, a letter reached the Central News Agency in London. It was written in red ink, and it was taunting, mocking the police, laughing at their failure, promising more. It was signed Jack the Ripper. That was the first time anyone had ever seen the name. Before this letter, the killer had been called other things: the Whitechapel murderer, Leather Apron. After it, he was Jack the Ripper, and he would be Jack the Ripper forever. At first, the police treated it as just another hoax. There were so many. But then, a few days later, came a night of 2 murders, and one of the victims was found with part of an ear cut. The letter had promised, in its grim way, to clip a victim's ears off and send them to the police. Suddenly, the hoax didn't look like a hoax. The press seized on it. The name exploded across every front page in the country. But the men actually investigating the case never quite believed it. The head of the Metropolitan Police wrote privately that he thought the whole thing was a hoax, but that they were bound to try to find the writer anyway. And within days, a newspaperman said openly what many suspected, that the letter had been written by a journalist to send a newspaper's circulation sky high. Then, decades later, came the most telling claim of all. In the 1930s, a journalist named Fred Best was reported to have confessed that he and a colleague at a London paper had written the letters signed Jack the Ripper themselves to keep the story alive and the papers selling. We can't be certain it's true, but think about what it would mean if it were. the most feared name in criminal history, the name that has sold a century of books and films, would not be the killer's at all. It would be a marketing invention, a headline that escaped into the world and never came back. But the letters didn't stop there.
The day after that double murder, a postcard arrived. It became known as Saucy Jacky. The handwriting matched the Dear Boss letter, and it referred to the 2 killings of the night before, calling it the double event. Those who believed it was real pointed to the timing. How could a hoaxer know the details so fast? But others noticed it was postmarked more than a day after the murders, by which time the news was already on the street and in every morning paper. Anyone could have read it and picked up a pen. And so the question that defines this entire case was born: real, or a clever stranger reading the news and playing a game? It's the same question that hangs over everything the killer supposedly wrote. And then came the one letter that, to this day, refuses to settle it.
Return to that parcel sent to George Lusk, the head of a civilian group trying to catch the killer. Inside was half of a preserved human kidney and the letter. The handwriting was crude, the spelling broken, the tone raw and unhinged in a way the polished Dear Boss letter never was. The writer claimed to have taken the kidney from one of the victims and to have eaten the other half. The kidney was examined. Some who looked at it said it was consistent with one of the victims, a woman who had been a heavy drinker and whose body had indeed been found with a kidney removed. Others said the evidence was too degraded to prove anything at all. The debate has never ended. But this letter is different from the others in one crucial way. Many of the researchers who dismiss every other letter as a hoax give this one, and only this one, real consideration as possibly genuine. And here is what makes that so strange.
The From Hell letter, the one that might actually be from the killer, does not sign itself Jack the Ripper. It signs only those 2 words, From Hell. Its handwriting looks nothing like the Dear Boss letter, nothing like the postcard that shares its style. So the 2 most famous letters in the case split cleanly in 2. The letter that gave the killer his world-famous name is probably a journalist's hoax, and the real murderer, if he ever picked up a pen at all, may have signed himself only as something from hell. The voice we think we know may not be his, which leaves one haunting question hanging over everything. We don't know who he was. 135 years later, after hundreds of suspects, countless books, films, walking tours, and even modern DNA claims that fall apart the moment they're examined closely, not one name has ever been proven. The case remains open. The face behind the Whitechapel murders is as blank now as it was that autumn. But the letters leave us with something stranger than an unsolved identity. They leave us unsure whether the killer ever spoke to us at all. The taunting, theatrical Jack the Ripper we all picture, the voice that named itself and laughed at the police, may have been written by someone with ink-stained hands in a newsroom, not blood on a knife. What was real were the women, 5 of them at least: Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, and Kelly. Failed by their city long before they were failed by a killer who was never caught. That much is certain. The rest is a voice in the dark we can't quite trust. The most famous killer who ever lived may never have said a word. We may have given him his name ourselves. So what do you think? Was any of it real? Did the killer write those letters, or did the press invent the monster's voice and sell it to the world? And if even one of them was genuine, which one? Tell me your theory in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more cases the official record never closed, subscribe to the Unsolved Echoes. New case every week. Until next time, stay curious.